Some people wear wealth like a crown, while others hide it behind ordinary clothes, and only those who truly understand respect can tell the difference. On a cool October evening, when the last rays of sunlight faded behind the glass towers of downtown Seattle, the dining room of Alder House glowed with warm amber light. Crystal glasses reflected soft music drifting through the air, polished silverware rested with perfect symmetry, and conversations floated quietly between executives celebrating new contracts, families enjoying birthdays, and tourists searching for an authentic American dining experience. Nobody noticed the man who stepped through the front door carrying nothing more than a worn charcoal coat over a simple navy sweater. His dark jeans looked ordinary. His leather shoes had clearly traveled many miles. Beside him walked a small boy, perhaps 8 years old, holding a neatly folded paper crane with both hands as though it were the most valuable thing in the world. They looked like any father and son hoping for a peaceful dinner after a long day. No expensive watch flashed beneath the lights. No security team followed behind them. No luxury car waited outside. Even the hostess barely lifted her eyes before reaching automatically for 2 menus. Around the room, several employees remained focused on guests who appeared far more important. A couple dressed in designer clothing received cheerful smiles before they had even reached their table. Another server hurried toward a businessman speaking loudly into his phone, assuming a generous tip would follow. The quiet father simply waited. The little boy looked up at him with gentle curiosity. The man answered with a calm smile that carried both patience and exhaustion, the kind only a single parent could understand after years of balancing success with bedtime stories, business flights with school concerts, and international meetings with promises never to miss another birthday. His name was Daniel Carter, though nobody in the restaurant recognized it. Across the dining room, Claire Bennett finished placing fresh tea beside an elderly couple before quietly turning toward the entrance. Unlike everyone else, she did not notice the man's clothing first. She noticed the way he paused before stepping fully inside, the subtle adjustment of his son's jacket, the careful placement of their shoes just beyond the welcome mat, and something almost invisible in the father's posture. It lasted less than a second, but to Claire it spoke louder than words. Her heartbeat slowed. Without announcing herself, without seeking attention, she walked toward them with measured steps. The hostess had already begun reaching for 2 ordinary menus when Claire gently touched her sleeve with a polite smile that needed no explanation. Before anyone could ask why, Claire stopped exactly 6 feet from the quiet stranger. She lowered her eyes. She placed her hands naturally at her sides. Then she offered a graceful bow, neither too shallow nor too deep, held for precisely the right moment before rising with calm dignity. Time itself seemed to hesitate. The little boy's eyes grew wide. Daniel Carter froze completely. Then, to the astonishment of everyone close enough to notice, the unknown father slowly returned the bow with exactly the same respect. Claire straightened slowly, her expression as calm as if nothing unusual had happened, yet the silence surrounding the entrance felt different now. The hostess blinked twice before forcing a polite smile, and finally leading the father and son toward a small table near the windows overlooking the rain-soaked streets. It was not one of the premium tables reserved for high-profile guests, only a quiet corner where the city lights reflected across the glass like scattered stars. Daniel thanked the hostess with a gentle nod before helping his son remove his light jacket. The boy carefully placed the folded paper crane beside his water glass as though it belonged there. Claire watched only long enough to confirm they were comfortable before returning to another table carrying a tray of steaming soup. She moved through the dining room with the same quiet rhythm she always had, never rushing, never drawing attention to herself. Most customers remembered the excellent food, but rarely remembered the waitress who served it. Claire had learned years ago that invisible people often noticed the details everyone else overlooked. Her coworkers sometimes teased her for being too reserved. They joked that she smiled more with her eyes than with her voice. Some believed she lacked confidence because she never competed for the wealthiest tables or flirted for larger tips. Others assumed she simply had no ambition beyond finishing another shift. None of them knew she observed every room the way a musician listened for a single note inside a crowded orchestra. Every gesture told a story. Every pause carried meaning. At the service station, another waitress leaned closer with a curious grin. "What was that bow about?" she whispered. Claire only smiled politely while arranging fresh chopsticks beside a ceramic plate. It felt appropriate, she answered softly. Appropriate, the waitress laughed. He looks like every other tired dad bringing his kid out for dinner. Claire did not argue. She simply returned to polishing a teapot until the conversation faded away. Across the room, Daniel quietly unfolded his napkin while his son looked around with wide, curious eyes. Papa, the boy asked in a gentle voice. How did she know? Daniel remained still for a moment before lifting his glass of water. I do not know yet, he replied carefully. But she noticed something that everyone else missed. The boy glanced toward Claire again. She bowed just like Grandma used to. Daniel smiled, although there was unmistakable emotion behind it. Yes, he answered. Exactly like that. The words lingered in his thoughts. During years of traveling between Tokyo, New York, London, and Seattle, he had attended thousands of formal meetings. Executives practiced the gesture after reading business manuals. Luxury hotels instructed employees to imitate it. Corporate hosts memorized the angle without understanding the feeling behind it. Claire's bow had been different. It carried neither performance nor obligation. It had contained recognition. Respect offered freely, not because of wealth or reputation, but because she understood something much older than either. Daniel found himself watching her without appearing to do so. She refilled coffee. Before anyone asked, she quietly folded a dropped napkin for an elderly guest whose hands trembled from age. She knelt beside a little girl to return a stuffed rabbit with the same gentle smile she had offered his son. Every movement appeared effortless. Every action seemed intentional. The restaurant buzzed with ordinary conversations once again, but for Daniel Carter, dinner had quietly become something else entirely. For the first time in many years, he was no longer studying a business opportunity. He was trying to understand a person. Claire approached their table carrying a porcelain teapot, 2 warm cups, and a small plate of freshly sliced oranges that the kitchen prepared for younger guests without charge. She placed everything down with quiet precision before speaking in a voice so gentle that it blended naturally with the soft piano music filling the restaurant. Good evening. My name is Claire. I will be taking care of you tonight. If your son has any food allergies or preferences, please let me know. We will be happy to adjust anything for him. Daniel looked at her for another brief moment before smiling politely. Thank you. That is very thoughtful. The little boy looked up with bright eyes. Can I have the grilled salmon? Claire nodded with genuine warmth. That is one of our chef's favorites. I think you will enjoy it. The child smiled immediately. Then that is what I want. Daniel closed the menu without hesitation. The same for me, please. And green tea, if it is available. Claire inclined her head ever so slightly. Certainly. She disappeared toward the kitchen without another unnecessary word. Daniel watched her until she vanished beyond the swinging doors. Most servers filled every quiet moment with conversation, hoping friendliness would increase their tips. Claire seemed comfortable allowing silence to breathe. Somehow that made her presence even more noticeable. His son carefully unfolded the paper crane and placed it beside the chopsticks arranged on the table. Papa, he asked quietly, are we still not telling anyone who you are? Daniel rested his hands together before answering. Not tonight. Why? Because I promised you. One evening where nobody expected photographs, speeches, or business meetings. The boy nodded slowly. Just dinner. Daniel smiled. Just dinner. It had become their tradition after his wife passed away 3 years earlier. Every few weeks, they would visit a place where nobody expected the billionaire founder of Carter Global Holdings to appear. No assistants. No chauffeurs waiting inside. No reporters tracking every step. Daniel wanted his son, Ethan, to remember simple evenings more than private jets or executive boardrooms. Success had built an empire that stretched across 3 continents, but it could not replace ordinary moments shared between a father and his child. Ethan quietly traced one finger along the edge of the folded crane. Mama used to say people show who they are when they think nobody important is watching. Daniel lowered his eyes for a second. The familiar ache never completely disappeared. She was right, he answered softly. Your mother noticed kindness before everyone else noticed success. Across the dining room, Claire emerged carrying another tray. As she passed a table near the entrance, a sharply dressed businessman snapped his fingers impatiently because his sparkling water had not arrived quickly enough. Claire acknowledged him with the same calm smile she offered every guest before politely assuring him she would return in just a moment. There was no irritation in her face, no forced cheerfulness, only steady professionalism. Daniel noticed everything. Wolf had taught him to recognize performance. Years of negotiations had shown him how easily people changed when they believed someone powerful was watching. Yet Claire behaved exactly the same with every customer. The demanding businessman received the same courtesy as the elderly couple celebrating 50 years of marriage. A college student eating alone received the same attention as the family hosting an anniversary dinner. Titles meant nothing to her. Expensive watches meant nothing. Daniel found that strangely refreshing. As Claire returned carrying their tea, Ethan looked up at her with innocent curiosity. "Miss Claire," he asked, "have we met before?" Claire paused for only the smallest fraction of a second before offering a gentle smile that somehow felt both warm and mysterious. "No," she answered softly. "But sometimes respect makes strangers feel familiar." Claire poured the tea with slow, steady movements, allowing the fragrant steam to rise before placing the first cup in front of Ethan instead of Daniel. It was a small gesture, almost invisible to everyone else, yet Daniel noticed it immediately. In many cultures, the child would have been served last. Claire had quietly chosen to honor the youngest guest first, recognizing that this dinner belonged as much to him as to his father. Ethan smiled politely before wrapping both hands around the warm cup. "Thank you, Miss Claire." "You are very welcome," she replied. "Please be careful. The cup is warm, but not too hot." Daniel watched her set his own cup down with equal care. "You seem very familiar with serving tea," he observed. Claire met his eyes only briefly. Every tradition deserves respect when it is shared with kindness. Before Daniel could respond, a loud voice echoed from the opposite side of the dining room. A group of well-dressed executives had just entered through the front doors, laughing confidently while expensive overcoats were handed to the coat attendant. Their arrival immediately caught the manager's attention. His posture straightened. His smile widened. Within seconds, two servers hurried toward the new guests carrying complimentary, sparkling water before anyone had even requested it. The manager personally escorted them to the largest table near the fireplace, apologizing repeatedly for a wait that had lasted less than a minute. Claire quietly stepped aside to allow the procession to pass. She showed no sign of annoyance, although she had been preparing to deliver fresh bread to Daniel's table. One of the managers glanced toward her and spoke in a low voice. "Claire, take care of the regular section. I need our strongest people on the executive table." She simply nodded. Of course. There was no disappointment in her expression. She picked up the bread basket and continued walking exactly as she had intended. Daniel heard every word without appearing to listen. He watched the contrast unfold with growing curiosity. The executives received immediate attention because they looked important. He and Ethan remained almost invisible because they did not. Yet Claire treated neither table as more valuable than the other. She placed the warm bread between father and son with the same careful smile she had worn since they arrived. "The butter was whipped fresh this afternoon," she said softly. "I hope you enjoy it." Ethan broke off a small piece before offering the first bite to his father. Daniel accepted it with a grateful smile. "Thank you, buddy." Claire noticed the exchange and quietly stepped away, allowing the simple family moment to remain uninterrupted. A few minutes later, one of the executives raised his hand impatiently and complained that the fireplace table was too close to the entrance whenever the doors opened. The manager apologized immediately and began rearranging reservations to satisfy the request. Daniel glanced toward the window where raindrops slowly traced silver lines across the glass. Their corner remained peaceful, undisturbed, almost hidden from the rest of the dining room. Ethan leaned closer to his father. "Papa," he whispered, "I like this table better." Daniel smiled. "So do I." His eyes followed Claire once again as she moved gracefully between guests, carrying plates, answering questions, and helping an elderly gentleman adjust his chair before returning to her work without expecting thanks. She never hurried toward the loudest voices. She quietly found the people who needed her most. Daniel realized that while everyone else in the restaurant seemed busy recognizing status, Claire was recognizing people. The aroma of grilled salmon drifted gently from the kitchen just as the evening settled into an easy rhythm. Rain continued tapping softly against the windows, and the conversations around the dining room blended into a comforting murmur that made every table feel private despite the crowded room. Claire carried 2 carefully arranged plates toward Daniel and Ethan, balancing them with practiced grace. Before placing the dishes down, she glanced briefly at Ethan's folded paper crane, making certain there was enough space beside it so nothing precious would be disturbed. The small detail did not escape Daniel's attention. She served Ethan first once again, positioning the plate so the fish faced the child instead of turning it toward herself for convenience. Then she placed Daniel's meal in front of him with equal care. "I hope everything is prepared to your liking," she said warmly. Ethan's face brightened. "It looks amazing." Claire smiled. "The chef will be happy to hear that." As she prepared to leave, Ethan reached into his pocket and carefully removed a pair of smooth wooden chopsticks wrapped inside a navy cloth sleeve. He looked at his father. "Can I use these instead?" Daniel nodded. "Of course." Claire stopped almost imperceptibly. Her eyes rested on the cloth sleeve for only a heartbeat before she spoke. "Those are beautiful." Ethan beamed with pride. "They belong to my grandfather." Claire lowered her voice respectfully. "Then they must carry many wonderful memories." Daniel looked at her with growing curiosity. Most people would have complimented the craftsmanship. Claire had acknowledged the history instead. Ethan carefully unwrapped the chopsticks, but as he reached across the table, one slipped from his fingers and rolled quietly onto the polished hardwood floor. Before the child could bend down, Claire was already kneeling. She picked up the chopstick gently with both hands instead of one, brushed away an almost invisible speck of dust using a clean linen napkin, then turned toward Ethan. Rather than handing it directly across the table, she presented it horizontally with both palms open and her head inclined slightly. Ethan accepted it instinctively with both hands. Daniel did not move. His eyes remained fixed on Claire. Around them, nobody else seemed to notice what had just happened. To everyone else, a waitress had simply returned a dropped utensil. To Daniel, she had quietly followed an etiquette observed in certain Japanese families when returning an object carrying personal meaning. It was not something taught in hospitality training manuals. It was something learned through lived experience and sincere respect. Ethan smiled shyly. "Thank you." Claire answered with another small nod. "You are welcome. I hope your grandfather would be happy to see you taking such good care of them." The little boy looked down at the chopsticks before whispering, "I think he would." Claire stood and excused herself without adding another word. Daniel waited until she had disappeared toward the kitchen before speaking. "Ethan, did you notice how she returned them?" The boy nodded immediately, just like Grandma always did. Daniel slowly leaned back in his chair, his thoughtful expression replacing the quiet smile he had worn all evening. There were now too many moments to dismiss as coincidence. The bow at the entrance, the order of serving tea, the careful respect for family traditions, the way she recognized meaning where others saw ordinary objects. He looked once more toward the kitchen doors as they swung gently open and closed. Somewhere behind them was a waitress whose understanding reached far beyond exceptional service, and for the first time that evening, Daniel found himself wondering not who Claire Bennett was today, but who she had once been. Dinner continued at an unhurried pace, allowing the quiet sounds of silverware and soft conversation to settle naturally around the room. Ethan tasted a small piece of salmon before his face lit up with unmistakable delight. "Papa, this is even better than the place in Portland," he said happily. Daniel laughed under his breath. "That is a very high compliment." Claire happened to pass by just in time to hear the remark. "I will make sure our chef hears that," she said with a warm smile. Ethan looked up at her. "Can you tell him thank you for me?" "I would be honored," Claire replied. She disappeared into the kitchen, returning only a minute later with a simple message. "He said your compliment made his evening." Ethan smiled proudly and returned to his dinner. Daniel watched the brief exchange with quiet interest. Claire never exaggerated kindness. She simply carried it from one person to another, as naturally as she carried plates across the dining room. A few minutes later she returned with a small ceramic bowl. The chef prepared a sample of homemade green tea ice cream, she explained. He would like Ethan to try it before dessert because he enjoys hearing honest opinions from young guests. Ethan looked at his father for permission. Daniel nodded. "Go ahead." The boy tasted a spoonful, paused thoughtfully, then smiled. "It tastes peaceful." Claire blinked once before a gentle laugh escaped her. That may be the nicest description anyone has ever given. Daniel smiled as well. Children often described food with surprising honesty, but Claire had accepted the unusual answer without amusement or correction. She seemed to understand exactly what Ethan meant. As Claire prepared to leave once more, Daniel spoke for the first time with deliberate curiosity. "May I ask you something?" She turned politely. "Of course. Earlier, when you greeted us, and again when you returned Ethan's chopsticks, your gestures felt remarkably familiar. Have you spent much time in Japan?" Claire remained quiet for a brief moment. She neither appeared uncomfortable nor eager to answer. Instead, she chose her words carefully. "I have been fortunate enough to learn from people who believed respect should be practiced instead of explained." Daniel studied her expression. It revealed almost nothing, yet somehow said more than a lengthy story ever could. "That is an unusual answer," he observed. Claire smiled softly. "Sometimes the longer story belongs to someone else." Before Daniel could ask another question, one of the servers hurried over looking flustered. "Claire, table 12 is asking for help. They ordered the premium tea service, but nobody can remember how to prepare it." Claire nodded immediately. "I will be right there." Daniel instinctively glanced toward the nearby table. An elegant elderly couple sat waiting patiently, while another server stood beside an ornate cast-iron teapot looking increasingly nervous. Claire approached without drawing attention to herself. She carefully warmed the cups first, discarded the first pour exactly as tradition required, measured the steeping time without checking a clock, then served the tea with graceful confidence. The elderly gentleman smiled with pleasant surprise. "This reminds me of Kyoto," he said quietly to his wife. Claire simply inclined her head. "I'm glad it brought back a happy memory." She returned to her duties before accepting any further praise. Daniel remained silent. Hospitality training could explain polished manners. Experience could explain confidence. But memories awakened through tiny details required something deeper. Ethan looked toward Claire, then back at his father. "Papa," he whispered. "She does not act like someone pretending to know these things." Daniel slowly nodded, unable to disagree. Every answer Claire gave seemed to reveal less than it concealed, and with every passing minute, the mystery surrounding the quiet waitress became more compelling than any business negotiation he had ever entered. Claire returned to Daniel and Ethan's table carrying nothing more than a fresh pot of hot water. "Your tea leaves still have another infusion left," she said softly. "The second pour is often gentler, but many people believe it reveals more character than the first." Daniel looked up with quiet surprise. "You seem to know not only the customs, but also the philosophy behind them." Claire carefully refilled the teapot before answering. "Sometimes small rituals remind us to slow down long enough to notice what matters." Daniel thanked her, but this time he made no attempt to continue the conversation. Instead, he decided to observe. Throughout his career, he had built companies by recognizing patterns other people overlooked. Every successful negotiation began with patient listening rather than quick conclusions. Tonight, Claire had unknowingly become the person he was trying to understand. Only a few minutes later, an opportunity arrived. An elderly Japanese couple entered the restaurant just as another wave of evening guests filled the lobby. They spoke quietly with the hostess, who smiled politely but clearly struggled to understand their request. The couple remained patient, repeating themselves without frustration, yet confusion slowly settled across both sides of the conversation. Claire noticed the exchange from across the dining room while collecting empty glasses. Without interrupting anyone, she walked toward the entrance and stopped a respectful distance away. She listened carefully before speaking. To Daniel's surprise, she did not immediately begin translating. Instead, she greeted the elderly couple with a warm smile and a graceful bow before speaking a few calm sentences in fluent Japanese. The couple's faces brightened instantly. The gentleman answered with obvious relief, and within seconds, all uncertainty disappeared. Claire turned back to the hostess. They reserved a quiet table near the windows because today is their wedding anniversary. They also requested hot water for the gentleman's medication before dinner. The hostess sighed with relief. "Thank you, Claire. I had no idea." Claire simply smiled. "It happens." They were very kind. She escorted the couple personally, pulling out the ladies' chair before quietly wishing them a wonderful evening in Japanese once again. Daniel remained completely still. Ethan looked from Claire to his father with wide eyes. "Papa," he whispered excitedly. "She really speaks Japanese." Daniel nodded slowly, but his thoughts reached much further. Her pronunciation had been natural. Her rhythm carried none of the hesitation common among people who learned from textbooks. More remarkable still, she had instinctively greeted the older couple using language that reflected both warmth and appropriate respect. It was effortless, invisible, genuine. When Claire passed their table again, Daniel finally spoke. "That was beautifully done." Claire looked slightly surprised. "Thank you. Where did you learn to speak like that?" She paused, her eyes briefly resting on the rain beyond the window before returning to Daniel. "From people who were patient enough to teach me that language is not only about words." Daniel waited, sensing there was more. Claire continued quietly. "It is also about understanding the heart of the person standing in front of you." Before Daniel could ask another question, the restaurant manager called Claire's name from the opposite side of the room. She excused herself with another small bow and disappeared once more into the evening's steady rhythm of service. Daniel watched her walk away, his curiosity now giving way to genuine admiration. Whatever story Claire Bennett carried with her, it was becoming impossible to believe it belonged only to a waitress. As the evening moved forward, the rain outside softened into a gentle mist that blurred the city lights into ribbons of gold and silver. Inside the restaurant, every table seemed wrapped in its own quiet conversation. Claire continued moving through the dining room with the same calm rhythm that had first caught Daniel's attention. She never appeared hurried, even when every table was occupied. It was as though she had learned long ago that people remembered how they were treated long after they forgot how quickly their food arrived. Ethan had nearly finished his dinner when he noticed a small display near the hostess stand. Tiny folded paper cranes, each made from different colors of delicate paper, rested inside a simple wooden bowl. "Papa," he whispered, pointing across the room. "Look." Daniel followed his son's gaze. The cranes were folded with remarkable precision. Some carried handwritten words in Japanese calligraphy, so elegant they looked almost painted. Ethan smiled with quiet excitement. They looked just like Grandpa's. Before Daniel could answer, Claire approached to clear their plates. Ethan looked up at her. "Did you make those?" Claire glanced toward the wooden bowl and smiled softly. "Yes. They are beautiful. Thank you." Ethan hesitated before asking another question. "Who taught you?" For the first time that evening, Claire remained silent a little longer than usual. Her eyes rested on the colorful cranes before she answered. "A very kind teacher many years ago." Daniel noticed the subtle change in her expression. It was not sadness exactly, more like gratitude wrapped around an old memory. Ethan leaned forward with genuine curiosity. "Was your teacher from Japan?" Claire nodded gently. "Yes." "Did you live there?" Another brief pause followed. "For several years." Daniel looked up immediately. Until now, every answer Claire had given had revealed almost nothing. This single sentence opened an entirely new chapter. Ethan smiled brightly. "That must have been amazing." Claire's eyes reflected the warmth of distant memories. "It changed the way I looked at the world." Daniel spoke carefully, respecting the quiet tone she had created. "Work brought you there?" Claire slowly shook her head. "Life did." She offered a polite smile that suggested the conversation had reached its natural ending, yet Daniel sensed she was not avoiding the truth. She was simply protecting memories that deserved privacy. Before she stepped away, Ethan asked one final question. "Do you still fold cranes every day?" Claire looked toward the display again. "Whenever I remember someone who showed me kindness." Ethan considered her answer for a moment before carefully picking up his own paper crane from the table. He held it with both hands, just as his grandfather had taught him. "Then I think I will keep making them too." Claire's smile became just a little brighter. "I hope you do." She quietly collected the empty dishes and disappeared toward the kitchen once again. Daniel remained seated, watching the bowl of colorful cranes from across the dining room. They were not decorations purchased from a gift shop. Every fold had been made by hand. Every crease carried patience. Every crane represented hours that nobody had paid for and almost nobody had noticed. Suddenly, Claire's quiet confidence made more sense. She had not learned respect from books or seminars. She had lived inside a culture that practiced it through ordinary moments. Yet one question continued to echo in Daniel's mind. If someone with Claire's knowledge, language, and remarkable understanding had once built a life across the Pacific, what path could possibly have led her back to serving dinner in a restaurant where almost no one recognized who she truly was? The restaurant settled into the comfortable rhythm that only a busy evening could create. Glasses caught the warm light above every table, quiet laughter drifted through the room, and the steady melody from the piano blended naturally with the sound of rain beyond the windows. Daniel believed the evening had finally reached its calmest moment. He was wrong. The front doors opened once more, and three elegantly dressed visitors stepped inside, carrying leather portfolios instead of umbrellas. The hostess greeted them warmly before checking the reservation list. Within seconds, the manager hurried toward the entrance, recognizing them immediately. They were executives from a respected Japanese investment group visiting Seattle to evaluate several regional partnerships. Their reservation had been arranged weeks earlier. The manager personally welcomed them, but his confidence quickly faded as the conversation became unexpectedly complicated. One executive spoke only limited English, while another preferred discussing every detail in Japanese before making even simple dining decisions. The hostess exchanged uncertain glances with another server. Menus were offered, politely declined, then offered again. Smiles remained friendly, yet confusion quietly filled the space between every sentence. Daniel observed the situation without saying a word. Ethan noticed it as well. "Papa," he whispered, "they look worried." Daniel nodded gently. Sometimes people are not worried about food. They are worried about being understood. The manager attempted another explanation, speaking slowly and carefully, but the misunderstanding only grew. One of the visitors appeared concerned about a dietary restriction that no one seemed able to understand correctly. The atmosphere remained polite, yet every passing second increased the awkwardness. Before anyone called for help, Claire appeared carrying a tray of freshwater glasses. She paused only long enough to understand what was happening. Then she placed the tray quietly on the reception stand and stepped forward with the same calm confidence Daniel had witnessed all evening. She greeted the visitors with a respectful bow before speaking fluent Japanese in a warm, measured voice. The tension disappeared almost instantly. Smiles replaced uncertain expressions. One executive laughed softly, another nodded with visible relief, and within moments the conversation flowed naturally. Claire listened carefully before turning toward the manager. They would appreciate a table with enough space to review several documents during dinner. One guest cannot eat shellfish because of a serious allergy. Another prefers vegetarian dishes tonight, and they would also like hot green tea served before discussing business. The manager released a quiet breath. "Thank you, Claire. You just saved the evening." She simply smiled. They were very clear. They only needed someone who could listen. Daniel watched every detail unfold. Claire had not merely translated words. She had recognized hesitation, understood unspoken concerns, and preserved every guest's dignity without making anyone feel embarrassed. The executives thanked her warmly before taking their seats. As Claire prepared to return to her section, the oldest visitor paused and spoke to her once more in Japanese. She answered with a gentle smile and another graceful bow. Daniel noticed the man's expression change. It was no longer simple appreciation. It was unmistakable respect. Ethan leaned closer. "What did he say?" Daniel looked toward Claire, who quietly resumed serving another table as though nothing remarkable had happened. "I could not hear every word," he admitted, "but I recognized the last sentence." Ethan waited expectantly. Daniel's voice became almost reflective. He told her that people who carry such grace usually have a story worth honoring. Daniel remained silent after that, unable to look away from the quiet waitress moving effortlessly through the dining room. For the first time in years, he found himself thinking that the most extraordinary person in the room might also be the one everyone else had almost failed to notice. Daniel remained thoughtful long after the Japanese delegation had been seated. He had spent decades building an international company, and experience had taught him that language alone never created trust. Respect did. Claire seemed to understand that instinctively. She never stepped into the spotlight after solving a problem. She quietly returned to her work as though nothing remarkable had happened. That quality intrigued him more than any impressive resume ever could. Ethan slowly finished the last spoonful of green tea ice cream before looking at his father. "Papa, why do you keep watching Miss Claire?" Daniel smiled, caught by the honesty only a child could offer. Because I think she keeps surprising me. Ethan tilted his head. Maybe she is just being herself. Daniel laughed softly. That is exactly what surprises me. Before either of them noticed, Claire approached carrying a small wooden tray with two neatly folded white hand towels warmed by gentle steam. She placed them on the table with careful hands. The rain has made the evening colder, she said. A warm towel is sometimes a pleasant way to end dinner. Ethan immediately wrapped his fingers around the soft cloth. This feels nice. Claire smiled. I am glad. Daniel accepted his towel with a quiet nod of appreciation. You think of details that most people overlook. Claire looked toward the rain-covered windows before answering. Sometimes people remember little comforts more than grand gestures. Her words lingered in Daniel's thoughts. They sounded less like hospitality and more like something learned through life itself. He hesitated for a brief moment before asking another question. Earlier, when the Japanese guests thanked you, I noticed something in your expression. It felt personal. Claire remained silent for several seconds. The restaurant continued moving around them, yet their small corner seemed untouched by the noise. Finally, she spoke. Many years ago, someone told me that if you truly respect another person's culture, they will never feel like a stranger in your presence. Daniel listened without interrupting. Was that your teacher? Claire nodded gently. He was an elderly gentleman who owned a small tea house outside Kyoto. I worked there while studying. Every morning before sunrise, he reminded me that service was never about carrying food. It was about carrying peace from one person to another. Ethan listened carefully, his young face completely absorbed. Did you stay there for a long time? Claire smiled at the memory. Long enough to understand that kindness sounds the same in every language. Daniel lowered his eyes for a moment. Suddenly, the first bow at the restaurant entrance made perfect sense. Claire had not recognized a billionaire. She had recognized a father quietly protecting. An evening with his son. She had noticed Ethan carefully carrying the paper crane. She had seen the respectful way Daniel allowed his child to enter first. Before wealth, before reputation, before status, she had seen a family. That realization settled over Daniel with unexpected force. Throughout his career, strangers usually noticed his watch, his name, his influence, or the headlines attached to his companies. Claire had noticed none of those things because they had never mattered to her. She had welcomed him with the same sincere respect she would have offered any father sharing dinner with his child. Daniel slowly looked toward Ethan, who was carefully folding the warm towel before placing it neatly back on the tray exactly as Claire had presented it. Without realizing it, his son had begun copying her quiet attention to detail. Daniel smiled to himself. In only one evening, without giving a single lesson, Claire Bennett had already taught his son something far more valuable than perfect manners. She had quietly reminded both of them that genuine respect always begins by seeing the person before the title. The evening was drawing to a close when Claire returned carrying the check inside a simple black leather folder. She placed it gently beside Daniel without interrupting the quiet conversation between father and son. There is no rush, she said with her familiar calm smile. Please enjoy the rest of your evening. Daniel looked at the folder but made no effort to open it. Instead, he looked toward Ethan. Would you like to visit the paper cranes before we leave? Ethan nodded enthusiastically. Can I? Claire smiled. Of course. She walked with him to the small wooden display near the hostess stand, explaining how every crane had been folded from a single square of paper without cutting or glue. Ethan listened with complete attention, asking careful questions while Claire answered each one with patient kindness. Daniel remained at the table, quietly watching the scene unfold. The executives near the fireplace had begun recognizing him. One of them looked twice before whispering something to a colleague. Within moments, another guest glanced toward Daniel, then quickly searched his phone beneath the table. Expressions slowly changed around the dining room. Recognition spread silently from one table to another. The manager noticed it next. He looked from Daniel to the glowing screen in a guest's hand before his face turned pale with realization. He hurried toward the table, stopping several feet away. Sir, I sincerely apologize. I had no idea you were Mr. Daniel Carter. Daniel looked up politely. There is nothing to apologize for. The manager swallowed nervously. If I had known, I would have seated you in our private dining room. We could have prepared a special menu. We would have. Daniel gently raised one hand. You already gave my son and me exactly what we came here for. The manager hesitated, confused. A peaceful evening. His voice remained warm, without the slightest trace of criticism. Around the room, conversations gradually faded as more guests realized who had been quietly dining among them. Several employees exchanged surprised glances. One of the executives who had received Claire's help stood respectfully from his table and inclined his head toward Daniel. The gesture confirmed what everyone was beginning to suspect. Claire turned after noticing the unusual silence. Ethan was still holding one of the colorful paper cranes she had just given him. She looked toward Daniel, then toward the manager, instantly understanding that his identity was no longer private. Yet nothing changed in her expression. She walked back to the table with the same steady pace she had maintained all evening. "I hope you both enjoyed dinner," she said simply. Daniel stood before answering. Every nearby conversation stopped. Even the soft piano seemed to fade beneath the weight of the quiet moment. Daniel faced Claire with calm eyes filled not with authority, but gratitude. Then, without a single word, he slowly lowered his head into a respectful bow. It was neither hurried nor symbolic. It was sincere. Claire's eyes widened ever so slightly. The manager froze. The nearby executives looked on with unmistakable respect. Daniel remained bowed for several seconds before lifting his head again. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Not for recognizing who I am. Thank you for seeing who we were." No one in the dining room spoke. The silence felt fuller than applause. Claire gently returned the bow with the same grace she had shown when they first met at the entrance. Neither gesture honored wealth. Neither acknowledged status. They honored something much older and far more enduring. In that quiet exchange, every person watching understood that genuine respect could never be purchased. It could only be recognized when it appeared before you. For several long seconds, nobody moved. The quiet respect shared between Daniel and Claire seemed to settle gently over every corner of the restaurant, replacing surprise with reflection. Then a small movement broke the silence. Ethan stepped forward, still holding the colorful paper crane Claire had given him. He looked up at his father, then at Claire, carefully remembering what he had just witnessed. Without anyone telling him what to do, he placed both hands at his sides and offered Claire a sincere bow of his own. It was not as polished as Daniel's. It was not as practiced as Claire's. It was simply honest. Claire's smile softened with unmistakable warmth as she returned the child's bow with equal sincerity. "Thank you, Ethan," she said quietly. "I will treasure that." Ethan looked up with bright eyes. "I think I will remember tonight forever." Daniel rested a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. "So will I." Around them, the restaurant slowly returned to life. Conversations resumed, though now they carried a different tone. The executives who had earlier commanded so much attention seemed less interested in discussing business than in observing the simple exchange they had just witnessed. The elderly Japanese couple smiled knowingly from across the room. Even the demanding businessman who had complained about his table earlier lowered his voice when speaking to the staff. It was as though one quiet moment had reminded everyone that kindness deserved more admiration than importance ever could. The manager approached Claire once the dining room settled again. His expression held both embarrassment and gratitude. "Claire," he said, softly, "I have worked beside you for almost 2 years, and I thought I knew you." Claire looked at him with gentle curiosity. "You have always been kind to me." He slowly shook his head. "Kind, perhaps, but I never realized how much you carried with you." Claire smiled with quiet humility. "Most people are carrying something. Mine simply happened to be visible tonight." The manager looked toward Daniel, who was preparing to leave with Ethan. He could have asked for anything in this restaurant. Claire followed his gaze. Instead, he asked for an ordinary evening with his son. She paused briefly before adding, "That seemed much more valuable." Daniel settled the check before quietly slipping a folded note beneath the leather folder. There was no dramatic gesture, no announcement, only a simple expression of gratitude left behind with the bill. As he helped Ethan into his jacket, the little boy carefully tucked the paper crane inside his coat pocket. "I want to keep this safe," he whispered. Daniel smiled. "I think that is a very good idea." Before reaching the front door, Daniel turned one final time. Claire was already helping another family find their table, greeting them with exactly the same calm smile she had offered everyone else that evening. Nothing about her posture suggested she had just been thanked by one of the most influential business leaders in the country. She had returned to serving strangers with the same quiet dignity that had first caught his attention. Daniel understood then that authenticity could not be performed. It could only be lived, one ordinary moment at a time. As father and son stepped into the cool night air, Ethan looked up at the mist drifting through the city lights. "Papa," he asked softly, "do you think we will ever see Miss Claire again?" Daniel looked back through the restaurant window, where Claire could still be seen welcoming another guest with the same respectful grace. A peaceful smile crossed his face. "Whether we do or not," he answered, "she has already given us something we will carry for the rest of our lives." The soft chime above the restaurant door echoed one last time as Daniel and Ethan disappeared into the misty Seattle evening. The rain had almost stopped now, leaving the sidewalks shimmering beneath the streetlights like ribbons of polished glass. Father and son walked side by side without speaking. Neither of them felt the need to fill the silence. Some conversations continued long after words had ended. Inside Alder House, the evening moved forward as though nothing extraordinary had happened. New guests arrived. Fresh meals left the kitchen. Glasses clinked gently beneath the warm lights. Claire quietly folded clean napkins, refilled water glasses, and welcomed every customer with the same peaceful smile she had worn since the beginning of her shift. She never mentioned Daniel Carter. She never spoke about the bow. She never explained why she had recognized something in him that no one else had seen. To her, respect was never a performance waiting for an audience. It was simply a habit of the heart. After the last guests departed and the chairs were carefully placed upside down on the tables, the manager walked toward Daniel's table to collect the payment folder. As he opened it, a handwritten note slipped gently onto the polished wood. There was no business card attached, no company logo, no invitation to a boardroom, only a few carefully written lines. "Thank you for giving my son an evening where he was seen before he was judged, and where I was treated as a father before I was recognized as a businessman. Some gifts cannot be measured. Tonight was one of them. With gratitude, Daniel Carter." Beneath the note rested a generous tip, but it was the words that held everyone's attention. The manager silently handed the note to Claire. She read it once, then carefully folded it along its original crease. Her smile was quiet, almost invisible, yet her eyes reflected the same gentle gratitude that had guided her through the entire evening. She did not keep the note in her pocket. Instead, she placed it inside the small wooden bowl beside the colorful paper cranes. It rested there among hundreds of carefully folded memories, becoming just another reminder that kindness always finds its way home. The following morning, Ethan placed his paper crane on the windowsill beside his bed before leaving for school. Every time he looked at it, he remembered not a famous restaurant or an influential father, but a waitress who had shown him that respect could be offered freely without expecting anything in return. Daniel carried the lesson into boardrooms across the world. During meetings, he found himself listening a little longer before speaking. He noticed assistants who quietly solved problems without recognition. He thanked receptionists by name. He paused before making assumptions based on appearances. His companies did not change because of a new strategy. They changed because their leader had been reminded that every title eventually fades, while every act of genuine respect leaves a lasting imprint on another human being. Weeks later, customers continued to admire the small display of paper cranes near the entrance without knowing the story hidden inside one folded note. Claire continued serving strangers exactly as she always had, believing that every person walking through the door carried a story deserving quiet dignity. She never raised her voice. She never asked anyone to remember her name. She simply chose, one table at a time, to see people before she saw positions, and hearts before she saw reputations. Perhaps that is why the most extraordinary people are so often mistaken for ordinary ones. They rarely announce their wisdom. They simply live it so consistently that, one quiet moment at a time, they gently change the people fortunate enough to cross their path.